Writing fiction is very similar to making a computer chip. Let's look at how a computer chip is made. First they start macro, they start warehouse big, lay out many feet or meters of paper and draw what will be the transistors working really large, and then they go through a shrinking process of shrinking it down to where it could fit on a postage stamp. So their approach is to start macro before shrinking it down to its most concentrated, condensed, purified form. For the sake of my example, let's say that a short story, novel, a work of fiction is a snapshot of another world. And now this is, I'm overgeneralizing, but my point is that a writer first creates an elaborate other world, and it could be like the real world except where certain situations take place, but a fictional, another world, and they fill it in, they put in all the plumbing, all the fictional characters move into all the houses and start working at all the fictional jobs, and the fictional electricity runs down the fictional power lines, and the fictional water flows down the fictional brooks and whatnot. And when all of that is done, then what the writer does is take a photo, and that photo is the short story, it is the novel. A finished work of fiction is so much more about what has been left out than what actually ends up in the story. I know my attitude in earliest days of writing was that working on character drafts, working on location drafts, and all the preparing for the writing of the story, to me seemed kind of besides the point. I just wanted to get to writing the story, and I always was reluctant to go into developing character and figuring out exactly, if I were to write about a town, what was its major economy, what were some of the things in its history that could shape the culture that it has today, those kind of examples. I just wanted to get to writing the story. But what I'm trying to convey here is that working in the macro is much easier than working in the micro. When you're working, yes, you can work on your actual, think about what you will present to the reader when you're done. You can work on that. But also it's a lot easier just to grab another notebook, that whenever you write in that other notebook, you know that it's sort of on the side. You're not directly working on your story, and that's where you can write down the plus and minuses of why a certain scene is working or it isn't, or you can write down an event that you came up with that you thought happened in a character's childhood that would really shape the way they behave today. And so when you give yourself plenty, now you know on a piece of paper the margin, like I happen to have this photograph, and this photograph, the margin is the black space around it. This is the border surrounding the actual image. If you give yourself, working in the macro is a matter of having, if your picture is that big, make the margin the size of your room. Make the margin much bigger than the actual image. Give yourself plenty of room. When you're writing, when you sit at a writing session, it does not necessarily mean that you have to actually be working on the story you're working on. You can work outside of it, and you can work on paper that you know that you're going to throw away. the thing is that when you're just doing you're going to do all that extra work anyway, but when you're just doing it in your mind, it's difficult to think as clearly about everything and make revelations about your story. When you jot down notes on pieces of paper and when you go through the process of actually writing it down, it solidifies it. It makes these ideas ones that you're more likely to remember and have an easier time working with. And if instead of rewriting and rewriting the story you're actually working on, if you can go to the side and say, okay, I want to work on this scene, here's my idea for scenario 1, here's my idea for an optional scenario 2, number 3 optional scenario, and you can do it more loosely, and it's a lot easier to make a list of changes you might make instead of going through the process of actually rewriting to make the changes. And you can find yourself coming up with more ideas, and then you can choose the ideas really worth making the changes in your actual story. All the ideas involved in a story greatly outnumber the ideas that finally end up in the story. Let's just guesstimate that 95% of everything that you think and imagine about your story will not actually end up in the story, but still play a very important role in its creation. If there's a part of your story that is confusing to you, you can sit down and write a page or two about what your thoughts are about that one particular part, what you think its weaknesses are, what you think its strengths are, why you think you might need to change it, why you're not sure if you should change that part. So what you're doing is you are writing, and even though you're not directly working on the story, this is just as important as directly writing the story. Especially if you have writer's block, redefine what it means to be a writer. A writer is someone who can think on the page. So make it part of your daily life to think on the page. And you're thinking all the time anyway. It's a different way of thinking. When you're thinking and when you're thinking on the page, these can be manuscripts that you can totally throw out. It's just through the act of writing, of seeing your thoughts on the page in print, where you can think about them by looking at them and reading them. I'm always at least a little bit reluctant to write a character draft. I'm in the middle, I'm really excited about working on my story, and then I'm like, oh no, I've got a new character, I have to go and think of what their life history is about and all, But what I've started to do is that when I write the first character draft, I don't put too much effort into it. I just kind of do a quick run through, and I use a template. Basically, I have a list of points that I've put together myself that, so that I can kind of think about what their family history might be like, about the different ways that they've been involved in society, like, are they, part of any club or group or movement, or, and those are just a couple of examples. And when I do that first character draft, okay, I have some ideas about that character, but more importantly, later on, while I'm still actually working on writing the story, I have another notebook with characters that are outside of my story, where I give myself room to think, okay, I sort of have an idea about who that character is. Why don't we try different things? What if that character is somehow profoundly different from the way I initially thought of them? And it is in doing that that these characters can become so much better, that we can start to fill our stories with characters that are compelling to us, that are intriguing to us. Let's say that you're writing a story that takes place in what was formerly a boom town. So there was some industry that showed up in the middle of nowhere, brought a lot of money to that place, and a lot of people moved there, a lot of buildings, basically a town was born, and in the course of a generation it went from population 15 to population 20,000. But then that industry closed down for whatever reason. The world didn't need whatever that industry was making anymore. And if you in working in macro, you've worked out these different things that happen to the town because of that, and some of the different, you can do some brainstorming about, who moves out of the town first, and the people who are stubborn to move out, and you're only brainstorming. You're in your imagination, you're visiting that fictional location. You've kind of forgotten about writing. You're still a writer, but you've forgotten about writing your story. And right now, you're just virtually transporting yourself to this fictional place that you're making up as you're going along, and you're putting your effort into visiting and making more real seeming this virtual place. And so through brainstorming, through drawing maps, through however you want to do the macro work on that location, you kind of work out a story outside of your story about what is happening with the town. When you're working on the actual story, you may never say that this was a boom town that the industry left, and that's why these things are happening. But in the course of the story, the reader is going to get something. The reader is like someone who would just drive through and spend a couple of days in that town, and they may never know that this was once a boom town that is now basically in a sense falling apart. But they can see, they get some of the evidence that is happening, and this is the magic of fiction writing, where you work in the macro. You have in your imagination you create and work with these characters just for the joy of working with intriguing characters, and you create and occupy the fictional locations just for the joy of being able to use your imagination to visit these places of pure imagination. And this is all outside of your story in the macro. And then when you take that snapshot, the quality of the information that actually ends up in the story will be, when a character reads a story, not knowing all that you know about your fictional world, they'll, it's similar to imagine them driving through your virtual world. They go to a diner to get breakfast, and they see some evidence of, they see, 12 moving trucks on the same road, and really nice houses, but the yards have become like jungles, completely no mowed lawns or anything, and they're just like, and that might be the final evidence that ends up in your story, but it's the world that is behind it that has enabled this quality of evidence in your story that can make it really fly for the reader. Think of fan fiction. Why does fan fiction work so well? Well, the macro has all been worked out. People know the macro of, like, say that you want to do Star Wars fan fiction. That universe is fully created, and so anyone could in their imagination visit that universe and take a snapshot, and that they can create their own little story that takes place because the macro has all been worked out. If you want to become a better writer, a great way to do so is to decide that being a writer is not just about writing a story. It's also about creating other realities. It's about imagining up different worlds. Even if those other worlds are like the real world, you're still imagining up whole new worlds. And if you make that, if you do a lot of work where you're just doing that, where you remember you can only do a few things at once. So during the time when you're world creating, set aside the story, set aside the characters. Don't spend too much time thinking about what's going to happen in your story. Just go ahead and enjoy making up, your own virtual reality. And when you get really creative, really imaginative with it, it can be intriguing for its own sake, and the kind of place that might be the reason your readers would want to read your story, is to have a chance to visit that world that you made up. This is more than just a way of writing. You want to actually provide yourself the physical space to work in the macro. You want to go and get 5 spiral notebooks, that one could be for character, brain ideas about the characters. One could be about maps and descriptions of location. But you're actually creating a space where you can work in the macro, so that you're very clear in your mind whether you're working in the macro or working in the micro. That is, working on the actual story that you want to publish. When you're working on the macro, remember, it's outside of the story. It's the place where you can write down all those stray thoughts that even the ones that seem like they're not completely important to write down, go ahead and write them down, just because a writer is someone who can think on the page. And make sure that you have places where you can do that, notebooks, documents on your computer, lots of scrap paper where you can jot down a stray idea that floats by, and then it might turn up later. You can read it again and decide whether to throw it out or keep it on your desk, but have actual places to work in the macro. It's good to have other ideas about how each scene in your story is going to go, other ideas about what your character is like, other ideas about everything, the history of the town the story takes place in. So what I do is that I have a folder for each episode on my computer, and so I have a document with the actual episode is written out. But then I have a document with all of those competing ideas. I have, for everything that is in the story, there's 1 to dozens of other competing ideas that I still have in the background, so that at any time I might have a new revelation about the story, and then I can say, oh, that I have that other idea. I can take that, I can find it, and change the story that way. And so for the number of words that are in my story, there are hundreds of more that are waiting outside of the story. And also, when I'm actually working on the draft, the story itself, that's when I get all those other ideas. So that if there's another idea, but what happens is that I'm not quite sure about it, it's sort of interrupting what I'm working on, I go over to that other document that has all those other ideas. I can put it down there, clear it out of my mind, and go back to what I'm working on. And that way, when I'm working in the macro, I can get a much clearer view about what my options are, and then I can cherry pick. I can kind of pick the best and have much more insight into how I can puzzle piece together a story that I am really excited about it working out really well. I have great hopes for you that you will realize the practice of art it's something that has been with humanity way before prehistory, and it is one of the great happinesses. It is one of the ways that we get closer to waking up to the great mystery that is our lives. And so I wish you all the best. I hope your writing goes well. Please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. And also, again, please take the time to look at my fictional webisode at solimation.com. The link is below. I hope your writing and art goes great, and have a good day.